Ambassador Thile sat alone in a dark room aboard the Conclave station. His thin blue fingers pressed a button on the recording device in front of him. The small light turned green. He took a long breath. His glowing skin, which normally shone bright like moonlight, had gone pale and dim. He had not slept in days. "I must record what happened," he said quietly. "The galaxy needs to understand what we saw, what we allowed to happen, and what came after." He closed his eyes and let his mind travel back. Back to when it all started. Back to when the galaxy still made sense. 3 standard galactic cycles ago, a Concorde survey ship was scanning the outer arm of the Milky Way. It was a boring mission. The outer arm was empty, cold, and far from anything important. Nobody expected to find anything there. But then the ship picked up strange signals. Radio waves. Primitive ones. They came from a small yellow star with a little blue planet circling around it. Earth. The Concorde sent a contact team. First meetings with new species happened all the time. It was nothing special. The team landed, met the humans, exchanged greetings, and filed their report. The report was short and not very exciting. Humans were classified as a Class 7 primitive civilization. They had not discovered faster than light travel. They had not united their planet under one government. They still fought wars among themselves over land, religion, and resources. They still burned dead plants for energy. By galactic standards, they were babies. The Concorde scientists found them amusing. One famous Thile researcher wrote a paper calling humans a moderately intelligent species with an unusual fondness for self-destruction. The paper got a lot of laughs at the Concorde Science Academy. Nobody took humans seriously. But Thile remembered something strange from those early days. Something most people ignored. The humans asked questions. Not a few questions. Not polite questions. They asked thousands of questions. They wanted to know everything. How did the ships work? What powered them? How did the communication systems function? What were the engines made of? How fast could they go? They wrote everything down. They recorded everything. They never stopped asking. The Concorde gave them a broken cargo ship as a gift. It was old, damaged, and worthless. A piece of junk that was heading for the scrap yard anyway. The humans thanked them politely and took it apart piece by piece. Within 2 cycles, they had built a working faster-than-light engine from the wreckage. It was rough and ugly, but it worked. The Concorde Scientific Council raised an eyebrow. A few members said this was impressive. A few others said it was a little worrying. But most just shrugged and moved on. Humans were still primitive. One engine did not change that. But there was someone else watching. Someone who did not shrug. The Zerith Dominion. Every species in the galaxy knew the Zerith. They were the oldest and most powerful empire in known space. They had ruled for over 10,000 years. Their territory covered 9,000 star systems. They had conquered more than 200 species and turned them into slaves and servants. Their warships were the size of small moons. Their armies numbered in the billions. And at the center of it all sat Empress Zarai, a creature of ancient power and absolute cruelty. The Empress had personally ordered the complete destruction of 3 entire species. Not because they had attacked her. Not because they were dangerous. But because they had not bowed low enough. Because they had shown what she called insufficient submission. The Zerith believed in one simple rule. The strong ruled. The weak obeyed. And anyone who did not obey was erased from existence. The Galactic Concorde existed only because the Zerith allowed it. The Concorde was not a real power. It was a collection of weak, frightened species who gathered together and pretended they mattered. The Zerith let them play their little political games because it was easier than conquering them. They were no threat. They were nothing. But the humans made the Empress uneasy. It was not because humans were strong. They were laughably weak by Zerith standards. A single Zerith patrol ship could have defeated every military force on Earth combined. It was not their technology. It was not their numbers. It was something else. Something that showed up in the Zerith's prediction systems. The Zerith had powerful computers that could model the behavior of any species. They would feed in data about a civilization, its history, its culture, its psychology, and the computers would predict exactly how that species would react to any situation. These models had been right for 10,000 years. They had predicted the surrender of every species the Zerith had ever conquered, sometimes down to the exact hour. But when they fed in data about humans, the models broke. The computers could not predict what humans would do. The results came back scrambled, contradictory, and impossible. Humans did not follow the patterns. They did not behave like other species. They were chaotic, irrational, unpredictable. One moment they were fighting each other. The next moment they were working together. They made decisions based on emotion, on pride, on something the Zerith computers could not even name. The Empress stared at the broken predictions on her screen for a long time. Then she called her war council. "I do not like things I cannot predict," she said. Her voice was cold and flat, like stone grinding against stone. "Remove them." And so the order was given. A subjugation fleet of 500 warships was assembled. 500 of the most powerful vessels in the Dominion, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet open like an egg. The fleet was commanded by War Admiral HFY Zarai, a decorated officer who had crushed dozens of species without ever losing a single ship. The fleet departed Zerith space and entered the faster-than-light corridors that would carry it to Earth's solar system. The journey would take only a few days. The mission was expected to last less than one. The Galactic Concorde detected the fleet's departure. Thile was at his monitoring station when the alert came in. He watched the 500 red dots on his sensor screen move slowly toward the small blue dot that was Earth. His heart sank. He had met humans. He had spoken with their diplomats. He had seen the way they smiled, the way they laughed, the way their eyes lit up when they learned something new. He had liked them. And now he was watching 500 warships fly toward their home to either enslave them or kill them all. He thought about sending a warning. He thought about calling an emergency session of the Concorde. He thought about standing up and saying something, doing something, anything. But he did nothing, because that is what the galaxy always did when the Zerith came for someone. Nothing. Thile watched the red dots move across his screen and whispered to himself. Those poor doomed humans. He had never been more wrong about anything in his entire life. The Zerith fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel just beyond the orbit of Mars. 500 warships arranged themselves in a perfect half-circle formation, their dark hulls blocking out the stars like a curtain being drawn across the sky. Each ship was massive, covered in thick armor plating and lined with plasma cannon batteries that glowed a dull, angry red. War Admiral HFY Story stood at the command platform of his flagship, the Crushing Hand. He looked at the small blue planet on his view screen and felt nothing. He had done this many times before. The script was always the same. Arrive, demand surrender. Wait, destroy resistance. Move on. It was boring work, but the Empress had given the order, and Keth always followed orders. He opened the broadcast on all frequencies. His message was transmitted to every device on Earth and simultaneously relayed to every species in the Galactic Concorde. He wanted everyone to watch. That was the point. Subjugation was not just about conquering one world. It was about reminding every other world what happened to those who did not kneel. People of Earth, his voice boomed across the planet. You are addressed by the Zerith Dominion. You have one planetary rotation to surrender all military forces, dismantle all weapons, and accept permanent Zerith governance. Failure to comply will result in the immediate and total destruction of your civilization. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning. Then, he sat down and waited. He expected the humans to respond within the hour. Most species did. Some cried. Some begged. Some tried to negotiate. A few tried to fight, but those were always the stupid ones. Fighting the Zerith was like fighting the ocean. You could swing your fists all you wanted. The water did not care. 1 hour passed. No response. 2 hours passed. Silence. Keth frowned. This was unusual. His communications officer confirmed that the message had been received across the entire planet. Every government on Earth had heard it. And yet nobody answered. Not a word. Not a signal. Nothing. Keth reported the silence to the Empress. Her response was immediate and cold. They have chosen. Burn them. The War Admiral gave the order without hesitation. 500 warships opened fire at once. Plasma rained from the sky like the anger of a god. Massive bolts of superheated energy slammed into the surface of the Earth, each one carrying enough force to flatten a mountain. The Zerith targeted military bases first, then capital cities, then population centers. They were thorough and precise. They had done this many times. New York vanished in a flash of white light. The city that never slept was gone in 3 seconds. Beijing followed. Then Moscow. Then London. Then New Delhi, Tokyo, Cairo, Berlin, Sao Paulo. One by one, the great cities of Earth were reduced to craters of melted glass and burning rock. The oceans boiled where the plasma touched the coastlines. Entire mountain ranges crumbled. The sky turned black with smoke and ash, so thick that the sun disappeared behind it. In 40 minutes, 1.2 billion human beings died. Across the galaxy, thousands of species watched the live sensor feed from the Concorde monitoring network. Ambassador Thile stood at his station aboard the Conclave, his hands gripping the console so hard that his knuckles turned white. His glowing skin had gone completely dark. Around him, other ambassadors watched in silence. A few covered their eyes. A Thile diplomat turned away and vomited. A Cretan ambassador folded her 6 hands together and began to pray. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. This was the natural order of the galaxy. The strong destroyed. The weak died. And everyone else watched and was grateful it was not them. But then something happened that made War Admiral Keth sit up straight in his command chair. His sensor officer called out in a confused voice. "Admiral, I am detecting unusual activity on the planet's surface." "They are dying," Keth said flatly. "That is expected." "No, Admiral. They are not all dying. There are energy signatures activating beneath the surface. Deep beneath, kilometers underground. And the surviving military forces are not scattering. They are reorganizing." Keth looked at the sensor data and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He did not have a word for it yet, but later, when he had time to think about it in the 1.3 seconds before he died, he would recognize it as the beginning of fear. The humans were not running. They were not surrendering. They were not even panicking. In the middle of the worst attack their planet had ever seen, with their cities burning and their people dying by the billions, they were pulling themselves together and preparing for something. 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a bunker built to survive the end of the world, General Lena Vasquez stood in front of a wall of screens. Every screen showed death. Casualty numbers climbed so fast that the computer could not keep up. Cities she had visited, places she had loved, people she had known were gone. Just gone, wiped away like chalk from a board. Her hands were shaking. Her jaw was clenched so tight that her teeth hurt. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to fall to her knees and let the grief swallow her whole. But she did not, because Lena Vasquez had a job to do. She had known this day would come. From the moment the first alien ship appeared in Earth's sky 3 years ago, she had known. Not because she was a pessimist, because she was a student of history. She had studied every species the Zerith had conquered. She had read every record, analyzed every battle, examined every surrender. And she had seen the truth that the rest of the galaxy was too afraid to admit. The Zerith did not accept equals. You either knelt or you died. There was no door number 3, no negotiation, no diplomacy, no peace treaty, just submission or extinction. So while the rest of the world celebrated first contact and marveled at alien technology, Lena Vasquez and a small group of the smartest, most determined people on Earth had been working on something else. Something secret. Something hidden so deep underground that no alien sensor could detect it. Project Prometheus. They had taken the alien technology the Concord had given them, and they had done what humans always did. They broke it apart. They studied it. They understood it. And then they made it into something terrifying. The Concord thought humans had spent 3 years building one rough FTL engine. That was what humans wanted them to think. The truth was that humans had spent 3 years building 12 weapons that could tear the fabric of space itself apart. Vasquez looked at the casualty counter. 1.2 billion and climbing. Her people, her world, burning. She pressed the communicator on her wrist. Her voice was steady. It did not shake. It did not waver. It was the voice of a woman who had already accepted what was about to happen and had made peace with the cost. All stations, this is General Vasquez. Prometheus is live. God forgive us. Deep beneath the burning surface of the Earth, 12 devices began to hum. The ground itself seemed to vibrate, a low, deep sound that could be felt in the bones rather than heard with the ears. Power systems that had been dormant for years surged to life, drawing energy from sources the Zerith could not even detect. Above them, the Zerith fleet continued its bombardment, its officers laughing and congratulating each other on another easy conquest. War Admiral Keth leaned back in his chair and began composing his victory report to the Empress. He never finished it. Far away, aboard the Conclave station, Ambassador Thile noticed something strange on his sensor display. 12 tiny energy signatures, barely visible, had appeared on the surface of Earth. They were small, but they were growing. Fast. Thile leaned closer to his screen and whispered, "What is that?" Nobody answered. Nobody knew. But they were all about to find out. The first Prometheus device launched from beneath the Pacific Ocean. It tore through the water and the smoke-filled sky like a needle through cloth, moving so fast that by the time the Zerith sensors detected it, it was already gone. Then the second one launched from under the Sahara Desert. Then the third from beneath the ice of Antarctica. Then the fourth from a hollow chamber carved deep inside the moon. One after another, 12 objects rose from their hiding places and vanished into the sky. They did not fly like ships. They did not move like missiles. They folded space around themselves and simply stopped being in one place and started being in another. The Zerith sensors could not track them. The Concorde sensors could barely see them. They were there, and then they were not, like stones dropped into water, leaving only ripples behind. Aboard the Conclave station, Ambassador Thile watched his display screen and felt his blood go cold. 12 energy signatures had appeared on the galactic map, but they were not staying near Earth. They were spreading outward in every direction, crossing thousands of light years in seconds. That was not possible. Nothing moved that fast. Nothing. What am I looking at? Thile said to the sensor technician beside him. The technician, a small furry Draenei with 6 eyes, stared at the screen and slowly shook his head. He had no answer. Across the conclave, thousands of alien ambassadors and diplomats crowded around their own displays. The mood had shifted. Minutes ago, they had been watching a routine subjugation. Now they were watching something they did not understand, and that scared them far more than the Zerith ever had. The first Prometheus device reached the Zerith fleet above Earth at exactly the 2-minute mark. It appeared in the center of the 500 warships, a tiny object no bigger than a ground vehicle, hanging silently in the emptiness of space. For 1/2 of 1 second, it simply floated there. Then it activated. There was no explosion, no flash of light, no sound, because there is no sound in space. Instead, the fabric of reality around the device bent. Space-time itself twisted and folded like wet paper being crushed in a fist. Every ship within 100,000 kilometers was caught in the distortion. Metal warped. Armor plating crumpled like tin foil. Engines imploded. Reactors collapsed into themselves. 500 Zerith warships, the pride of the Dominion's military, each one the size of a city, were compressed, twisted, and shredded into dust in less than 4 seconds. They did not explode. They simply stopped existing. Where the mightiest fleet in the galaxy had been, there was now nothing but a cloud of subatomic particles slowly drifting apart in the cold silence of space. War Admiral Keth Zarai had exactly 1.3 seconds to understand what was happening. In that brief moment, his brain registered something his species had not felt in 10,000 years. Pure, absolute terror. Then, the crushing hand folded in on itself, and Keth Zarai became nothing. The conclave erupted. Ambassadors screamed. Displays flickered as the sensor network struggled to process what had just happened. A Thile diplomat fainted and crashed to the floor. 3 Cretan ambassadors began wailing in their native language. Thile gripped his console and stared at the space where 500 red dots had been on his screen. They were all gone. Every single one. In 4 seconds. But the horror was only beginning. The remaining 11 Prometheus devices were not aimed at the fleet. They had never been aimed at the fleet. The fleet was just the first target. The real targets were much bigger. At the 4-minute mark, a Prometheus device appeared above Zerith shipyard Nexus 7, the largest military construction facility in the Dominion. 3,000 warships were being built there. 50 orbital platforms surrounded the Nexus, each one a factory of death. The device activated. The Nexus and everything around it was twisted into nothing. 3,000 unfinished warships, 50 platforms, and 2 million Zerith workers vanished in an instant. At the 5-minute mark, 2 more devices hit the Dominion's central communication network. A series of relay stations spread across 40 star systems that allowed the Empress to command her forces across the galaxy. Every relay station was destroyed simultaneously. The Zerith Dominion went deaf and blind in 1 second. At the 6-minute mark, a device appeared above the cloning facilities on Zerith Moor, where billions of drone soldiers were grown in vast underground tanks. The facility was the backbone of the Dominion's ground forces. It took the device 3 seconds to erase it from existence. At the 7-minute mark, 2 devices struck the Dominion's fuel reserves, massive space stations filled with the refined energy crystals that powered the Zerith war machine. Without fuel, the remaining Zerith ships across the galaxy were stranded, dead in the water, helpless. One by one, the critical systems of the Zerith Dominion went dark. On the galactic map aboard the Conclave, Thile watched entire sections of Zerith space blink out. Star systems that had been marked in Zerith red for thousands of years turned gray. Shipyards, command posts, fortress systems, fuel stations, communication relays, all gone. It was like watching a body bleed out, one artery at a time. The conclave had gone silent. No one screamed anymore. No one fainted. They just watched. They watched an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years come apart like a sandcastle in a rising tide. At the 12-minute mark, the final Prometheus device appeared in orbit above Zerith Prime, the throne world of the Dominion, the home world of the Empress, the heart of everything the Zerith had built over 100 centuries. Empress Zarai was standing in her war room when the alarms began. She had been watching her empire die on her own sensor displays. Report after report came in, each one worse than the last. Shipyard Nexus 7 gone. Communication network gone. Cloning facilities gone. Fuel reserves gone. Her general screamed for orders. Her admirals begged for instructions. Her predictive computers, the machines that had guided Zerith's strategy for millennia, displayed only one word on every screen, over and over and over. Impossible. 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 The Empress was not a creature who felt fear easily. She had ruled an empire of 9,000 star systems. She had ordered the extinction of entire species without blinking. She had crushed rebellions, ended civilizations, and bent the galaxy to her will for longer than most species had existed. But now she felt something cracking inside her chest. Something old and deep and terrible. The Prometheus device in orbit above her world did not activate immediately. Instead, it broadcast a message. The message was in the Zerith language, spoken in the Empress's own voice, synthesized perfectly from intercepted communications. The words echoed across the entire planet. You had one planetary rotation to surrender. Your time is up. Then the device activated. It did not destroy Zerith Prime. That was not the point. The humans were not the Zerith. They did not crack planets. The device targeted the military, the orbital defense platforms, the shipyards in orbit, the weapons factories on the surface, the palace's war complex, the command bunkers. Everything the Dominion used to project its power was erased. Surgically, precisely, completely, the planet survived. The people survived. But the Empire was dead. The Empress was pulled from the rubble of her palace by her personal guards. She stood in the ruins and looked up at the sky. Where her mighty orbital stations had been, there was only a field of glowing debris, falling slowly through the atmosphere like burning rain. The clock on the conclave's display read 14 minutes. 14 minutes since the first device launched from Earth's ocean. 14 minutes since a species that had known the stars for 3 years decided to answer 10,000 years of tyranny. The galactic sensor map updated one final time. Where the Zerith Dominion had once blazed across 9,000 systems, there was silence. No fleets, no communications, no command structure. The Dominion was not conquered. It was not occupied. It was simply decapitated. Every hand it used to grip the galaxy had been cut off. Then, from Earth, battered and burning, and covered in the ashes of 1.2 billion dead, a single transmission went out. It was broadcast on every frequency, in every known galactic language. The voice belonged to General Lena Vasquez, and it was calm, steady, and heavy with grief. This is the United Earth Defense Command. To the Zerith Dominion, your empire is over. To the rest of the galaxy, we did not start this. We finished it. We ask only to be left in peace to bury our dead. The conclave of voices was silent for the first time in its 4,000-year history. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 4,000 species, gathered from every corner of the galaxy, sat in total stillness and tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Ambassador Thile looked at his hands. They were shaking. His glowing skin flickered like a dying candle. Tears ran down his thin face and dripped onto his console. A young Alluri aide approached him carefully. "Ambassador," she whispered. "What do we do now?" Thile stared at the galactic map, at the darkness where the Dominion used to be, at the small blue dot, still burning, still alive. "Now," he said quietly, "everything changes." In the hours that followed, the galaxy did not celebrate. It panicked. The Zerith Dominion, the empire that had kept 1,000 species in line through fear alone, was gone. Wiped out in 14 minutes by a species that most of the galaxy had been laughing at 3 years ago. And now every civilization, every government, every ambassador in the Concord was asking the same terrified question. If they did that to the Zerith, what could they do to us? The conclave of voices held an emergency session. It was chaos. Ambassador after ambassador took the speaking platform, and each one had a different opinion about what to do next. The Thile delegation demanded an immediate military alliance with humanity, arguing that Earth was now the most powerful force in the galaxy, and it was better to be their friend than their enemy. The Cretan delegation wanted the opposite. They wanted every remaining species to band together and destroy humanity before it was too late. "Today the Zerith," the Cretan ambassador hissed. "Tomorrow us." The Draenei delegation simply wanted more information. What were these weapons? How did they work? Could they be stopped? Could they be copied? Nobody had answers. The technology behind Project Prometheus was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Concord's best scientists could not even explain how the devices moved through space, let alone how they distorted reality itself. Ambassador Thile sat quietly through the screaming and the arguments. He did not speak. He was thinking about the transmission from Earth, the voice of General Vasquez, the way she had said those words. "We ask only to be left in peace to bury our dead." There was no pride in that voice, no victory, only exhaustion and sorrow so deep it was almost impossible to hear. When the conclave finally fell quiet, Thile stood up. He walked to the speaking platform and looked out at 4,000 species staring back at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I will go to Earth," he said simply. "I will speak with them. I will find out what they want." Nobody argued. Nobody volunteered to go with him. He went alone. The journey to Earth took 2 days. Thile spent most of that time staring out the window of his shuttle, rehearsing what he would say, imagining what he would find. He prepared himself for many things. He prepared himself for anger, for hostility, for threats. He prepared himself for a victorious military power flexing its muscles and making demands. He prepared himself for the worst. He was not prepared for what he actually found. Earth was broken. As his shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Thile pressed his face against the window and felt something inside him crack apart. The planet he had visited 3 years ago, with its blue oceans and green lands and cities that sparkled at night, was barely recognizable. Massive craters dotted the surface where cities had once stood. Some of them still glowed orange with heat. Coastlines had changed shape where the oceans had boiled and receded. A thick layer of gray ash and smoke covered most of the northern hemisphere, blocking out the sunlight and dropping temperatures across the continent. His shuttle landed in what used to be Switzerland. The city of Geneva was gone. In its place was a vast flat plain of melted glass and rubble. But nearby, in the ruins outside the old city limits, humans had already set up emergency camps. Thousands of tents stretched across the landscape, filled with refugees, wounded, and orphans. Medical teams moved between the tents, their faces exhausted and their uniforms stained with dust and blood. Thile stepped out of his shuttle and stood still for a long moment. The air smelled like burning. In the distance, a child was crying. Somewhere else, a woman was singing a soft, sad song, the kind of song you sing to a baby to help it sleep. The sound of it nearly brought Thile to his knees. These were not conquerors. These were survivors. General Lena Vasquez came to meet him. She walked slowly, like someone carrying a weight that was too heavy for any one person to hold. She looked nothing like the strong, confident officer in the file Thile had read. Her face was thin and drawn. Her eyes were red and surrounded by dark circles that spoke of days without sleep. She was only 43 years old, but she looked 60. She shook his hand. Her grip was firm, but her fingers were cold. "Thank you for coming, Ambassador," she said. Her voice was polite but flat, as if all the emotion had been drained out of it. "I apologize for the surroundings. We are still digging out." Thile looked at the ruins around them and then back at Vasquez. "General, I must ask you some questions. The entire galaxy is watching. They are afraid." "They should be," Vasquez said. "Not as a threat." She said it the way someone says the sky is blue. A fact, nothing more. They sat together in a temporary command tent. The walls were thin fabric, and the wind outside made them flap and shake. Inside, there were maps pinned to boards, communications equipment humming on folding tables, and empty coffee cups everywhere. It looked nothing like the command center of the species that had just destroyed the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Thile asked her about Project Prometheus. Vasquez was honest. She told him that from the very first day of contact, a group within Earth's military and scientific community had begun planning for the worst. They had studied the Zerith. They had learned everything they could about the Dominion's history, its tactics, its strategy, and its psychology. They had talked to other species in the Concord quietly, unofficially, and had heard the same story over and over. The Zerith could not be reasoned with. They could not be negotiated with. They either took everything you had, or they killed you and took everything you had. "We saw no other way," Vasquez said. She stared at the table between them. "We knew they would come for us eventually. And we knew that when they came, we would either have the ability to hit back hard enough to end the threat, or we would die. There was no middle ground. The Zerith did not allow middle ground." She looked up at Thile with eyes that were steady but full of pain. 1.2 billion people, Ambassador. That is what we lost before Prometheus activated. I gave the order to launch, and I do not regret that decision, because if I had not, we would all be dead or in chains right now. But I will carry those 1.2 billion souls with me for the rest of my life. Every single one. Thile asked the question that the entire galaxy wanted answered. "General, will you use these weapons again?" Vasquez was quiet for a very long time. Outside, the wind blew ash across the ruined landscape. The child was still crying somewhere in the camp. The woman was still singing. "We will never strike first," Vasquez said finally. "We built Prometheus to survive, not to conquer. We are not the Zerith. We do not want an empire. We do not want to rule anyone. We want to rebuild our world and mourn our dead and raise our children in peace." She paused. Her jaw tightened. "But if anyone ever does to us what the Zerith did, we will answer. And the answer will be the same. That is the only promise I can make, Ambassador. We will never start a war, but we will always finish one." Thile nodded slowly. He believed her, not because her words were convincing, but because he had seen the ruins outside. He had seen the camps. He had heard the crying children and the singing mother. A species that was drunk on power and looking for conquest did not look like this. A species that was grieving looked like this. He returned to the conclave and delivered his report. He told them everything Vasquez had said. He described the ruins of Earth, the refugee camps, the ash-covered sky, the sound of children crying. He told them that humanity did not want war. He told them that humanity wanted only to be left alone. Some believed him. Some did not. But nobody, not one single species in the entire galactic concord, made a move against Earth, because whatever they believed about human intentions, they'd all seen what happened to the last empire that touched that small blue planet. And in the ruins of Zerith Prime, the Empress sat alone in a room that used to be a throne hall and was now a pile of broken stone and twisted metal. Her guards had offered her food and water. She had refused both. She stared at the wall and said nothing for days. When she finally spoke, it was only one sentence. She said it to no one in particular, in a voice so quiet that only one guard heard it. "We should not have touched them." 5 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Zerith Dominion shattered into dozens of small, weak states, each one ruled by a different former general or regional governor, each one claiming to be the true heir of the empire. They fought among themselves constantly, squabbling over scraps of territory like dogs fighting over bones. None of them were strong enough to threaten anyone. The great empire that had ruled 9,000 star systems for 10,000 years had become a collection of angry, broken pieces. A footnote in history. The 200 species that the Zerith had enslaved were free for the first time in centuries. Some of them had been under Zerith control for so long that they had forgotten what freedom looked like. The first months were difficult. Economies collapsed. Governments had to be built from nothing. Entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but obedience, and now they had to learn how to think and choose and lead for themselves. But they were not alone. Quietly, without ceremony or announcement, humans began showing up. Engineers who helped rebuild power systems. Doctors who treated diseases that Zerith masters had never bothered to cure. Teachers who opened schools and buildings that used to be slave barracks. They came not as conquerors or rulers, but as volunteers. They asked for nothing in return. When the work was done, they went home. A Vellani elder, whose species had been enslaved for 600 years, was asked by a Concord journalist what she thought of the humans. She considered the question for a long time, her old eyes looking at something far away. "They burned the house of our jailer," she said at last. "And then they came and helped us build a new one. A house of our own. I do not understand them, but I am grateful they exist." Earth itself was slowly healing. The craters where cities had once stood were still there, vast gray scars visible from orbit, but life was returning to the edges. Grass grew through the rubble. Trees were planted along the rims. In some places, flowers had been seeded by the millions, turning the craters into enormous gardens of white and yellow and red that could be seen from space. The largest crater was where New York City had been. The humans did not rebuild there. Instead, they turned the entire basin into a memorial. 12 million white flowers were planted across it, one for every person who had lived in the city. At the center, a single black stone pillar stood 30 meters tall, with no writing on it. No names, no dates. Just a smooth, dark surface that reflected the sky above. People came from all over Earth to stand at the edge of the crater and look at the flowers. They did not speak much. They did not need to. The flowers said everything. Humanity joined the Galactic Concord, but not as a Class 7 primitive. The classification system did not have a category for what humanity had become. After weeks of debate, the Concord created a new one. Tier 0 Strategic Civilization. It had never existed before. It was invented for humans alone. It meant, in simple terms, that humanity possessed the power to reshape the galactic order by itself, and that all interactions with them should be conducted with extreme care and respect. Some species resented this. Some feared it, but most simply accepted it as the new reality. The galaxy had a new apex species, and unlike the Zerith, This one did not seem interested in using its power to dominate others. That was confusing to many. An empire that chose not to act like an empire was something the galaxy had never seen before. Ambassador Thile had become the most important diplomat in the Concord. He was the one who had gone to Earth when no one else would. He was the one who had spoken with General Vasquez. He was the one who had told the galaxy the truth about what humanity wanted. Over the 5 years since the 14 minutes, as the event came to be called, Thile had worked tirelessly to build bridges between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. He had negotiated trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. He had talked frightened governments off the edge of panic. He had argued, pleaded, and persuaded until his voice was raw. And now he was about to give the most important speech of his life. The full conclave of voices was assembled. 4,000 species gathered in the great circular chamber of the conclave station. Every seat was filled. Every screen across the galaxy was tuned in. Thile walked to the central speaking platform, his bioluminescent skin glowing a soft, steady blue. He looked out at the thousands of faces watching him and took a breath. For 10,000 years, he began, this galaxy operated on one simple belief. The strong rule. The weak obey. The Zerith Dominion was built on that belief. They conquered 200 species because they were stronger, and because those species were weaker. And we, the Concord, accepted it. We watched it happen. We told ourselves it was the natural order of things. We looked away because it was easier than looking at the truth. He paused and let the silence hold. Then the humans arrived. A small young species from an unremarkable planet on the edge of the galaxy. We looked at them and saw nothing. We classified them as primitive. We gave them a broken ship and expected them to be grateful. And when the Zerith sent 500 warships to burn their world, we watched. We did nothing, just as we always did. His voice grew quieter, but in the silent chamber, every word carried. 1.2 billion humans died that day. 1.2 billion lives ended in 40 minutes, while 4,000 species watched and said nothing. And then, in 14 minutes, humanity destroyed the most powerful empire in galactic history. Not because they wanted to conquer, not because they wanted power, because their children were dying, and they refused to let it continue. Thile looked across the chamber. He saw shame on some faces, fear on others, understanding on a few. We should not fear humanity, he said. We should be ashamed. Ashamed that we allowed the Zerith to enslave 200 species for millennia. Ashamed that we sat in this chamber and debated trade agreements while entire civilizations suffered in chains. Ashamed that it took a species of 3 years galactic experience to do what 4,000 species in 4,000 years never had the courage to do. He straightened his back and let his skin glow brighter. The humans taught us something. Strength is not about how many ships you have or how many systems you control. It is about what you are willing to do when everything you love is on fire. The humans lost more in one day than most of us will lose in a lifetime. And they did not break. They stood up, and they ended a 10,000-year tyranny in 14 minutes. He looked down at his hands. They were steady now. The old galaxy is gone. The galaxy of fear and submission and silence is over. What we build next is up to us. But I suggest we build it differently. I suggest we build it the way the humans would. Not with fear, not with threats, but with the simple, stubborn refusal to let cruelty win. When he finished, the chamber was still. 4,000 species sat in silence. Then, slowly, one ambassador stood up. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 100. One by one, across the entire conclave, they rose to their feet. It was a human gesture of respect that has spread through the Concord over the past 5 years. Standing when someone earns it. 4,000 species, standing together, in a chamber that had been built on compromise and cowardice, now filled with something new, something that felt almost like hope. On Earth, General Lena Vasquez did not watch the speech. She had retired 3 years ago. She lived quietly in a small house in Colorado, on a hillside that overlooked the memorial crater where New York had been. Every morning, she sat on her porch and watched the sunlight move across the field of white flowers below. She did not give interviews. She did not write a book. She did not attend ceremonies. She simply lived quietly with the weight of everything she had done and everything she had lost. On this particular morning, her communicator chimed softly on the table beside her. She picked it up and opened the message. It was from a species called the Villani, from a planet on the far side of the galaxy. She had never heard of them. The message was short. It had been translated into English, and the translation was a little rough, but the meaning was perfectly clear. "Thank you for our sky." Vasquez read the message twice. She set the communicator down on the table. She looked out at the flowers swaying in the morning breeze. 12 million white petals catching the sunlight, dancing gently over the grave of a city. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, not from guilt, from something she had not felt in a very long time. Something warm and quiet and unexpected. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, it had been worth it. Far away, aboard the Conclave station, Ambassador Thile sat alone in the same dark room where he had begun his recording 5 years ago. He pressed the button on the device one last time. The green light turned on. "Let the record show," he said, his voice calm and clear, that on this day, a species that had known the stars for less than 1 generation broke the chains of the galaxy's oldest tyrant. They did not do it for glory. They did not do it for power. They did it because 1.2 billion of their people were murdered, and they refused to let the next billion follow. He paused. The light on the recorder blinked steadily. History will remember many things about humanity. Their ingenuity, their stubbornness, their terrifying capacity for war. But history should remember this above all else. They were not the monsters the Zerith expected. They were the monsters the Zerith created. He pressed the button. The light turned off. The recording was complete. Thile sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about flowers growing in craters, and children learning to read in buildings that used to be prisons, and a tired old general on a hillside, crying in the morning sun. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the stars. There were so many of them, and for the first time in 10,000 years, none of them belonged to a tyrant. The galaxy was free, and it had a small, battered, stubborn blue planet to thank for it.